The afternoon I was discharged from the hospital, still trapped in a wheelchair after the crash that stole my legs, my son stood behind the locked iron gate and said, "This house isn't yours anymore. Get lost." Rain poured down as I stared at the home I had spent over 40 years building. Then he turned away and walked inside with his wife, leaving me outside like a stranger. 4 months later in court, the security footage began to play. My son looked at the screen once and went pale. "I'm so grateful you chose to stay. Seriously, out of everything you could be doing right now, you're here. So let me ask, what city, what country are you coming from? Leave it below. Let's see how far this story travels." Worth mentioning, some details in this story are fictional, crafted to carry a deeper message. The names, the places coincidental. The lesson underneath it all. That part is very much worth your time. Before I tell you how I lost everything, let me tell you what everything looked like, because you need to understand what was worth taking. My name is Walter Kane. I am 68 years old, and the house I built my life inside, a 6-bedroom colonial on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, sitting 50 yards from the Atlantic, with a porch wide enough to fit a dining table and still have room to breathe. That house is the place this story begins. Sullivan's Island is the kind of place people drive slowly through, not because the roads are narrow, but because they don't want to stop looking. Spanish moss draped over old oaks, salt air that settles on your skin like something alive. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, it feels earned. I moved there in 1987 with my wife Eleanor, and a business that consisted of 3 trucks, 1 contract, and more stubbornness than sense. By the time Eleanor passed 12 years ago, now a Tuesday morning in October, fog still sitting on the water, I had built that stubbornness into something real. 40 years in freight and logistics. Warehouses from Charleston to Greenville. A fleet that grew from 3 trucks to 300. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you because what came later only makes sense if you understand where it all started, with nothing, and with someone willing to work until his hands forgot what rest felt like. I was also telling you about the house, the oak tree in the front yard. I planted it myself the spring we moved in. It was barely a sapling, then thin as my wrist. By the time all of this happened, it had a trunk you couldn't wrap your arms around. 80-some-odd feet tall. You could see it from the road. Neighbors used it as a landmark. Turn left at the big oak on Kane's property. That tree was the first thing I thought about when I understood I might never go back. Inside the house, I kept things that mattered to me, the way certain men keep things quietly without making a fuss about it. A collection of Patek Philippe watches. I had bought one at a time, over 30 years each one, marking a year when the company cleared a milestone I hadn't been sure we'd reach. 2 cars in the garage, a 1967 Mustang Fastback in Highland Green that I'd bought the year the business first turned a real profit, and a 1971 Corvette Stingray that had once belonged to my father. European oil paintings on the walls, a cellar with over 300 bottles of wine, some of them older than my son. Derek was 41 that winter. He and his wife Brittany lived in the house I'd bought them 2 miles away, a 4-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street with good schools and a neighborhood where people waved at each other. I had paid for it in full. I am not saying that with bitterness. I'm saying it because it's true, and because the truth matters here more than anything else I'm going to tell you. He came by most weekends, always well-dressed, always with something smooth to say. That winter, I remember him standing in my study, hands in his pockets, eyes moving across the room, the way a man's eyes move when he's adding things up in his head. "That watch collection alone has to be worth something serious," he said, nodding toward the display case behind my desk. "I wouldn't know," I told him. "I never looked it up." He laughed. "You should, Dad. Things like that, you want to have a plan." I thought he meant estate planning. The kind of responsible conversation adult children have with aging parents. I smiled and changed the subject. Brittany was with him that evening. She had the kind of beauty that required maintenance, perfect nails, perfect hair, a smile that arrived right on schedule and left just as precisely. She walked through the living room, the way certain people walk through places they're already imagining as their own, her eyes touching the corners of the room, the ceiling, the fireplace, the paintings. She didn't say much. She rarely did when she was thinking. "This is such a beautiful home, Walter," she said, running one fingertip along the edge of the mantel. "It would be a shame to see it go to waste someday." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just poured myself another bourbon and watched the fire. There was also Savannah. She was the daughter of my younger sister, Margaret, who had passed 5 years before from a cancer that moved fast and left no room for goodbyes. Margaret had been my responsibility since she was 9 years old, after our parents died within 18 months of each other. I had raised her on next to nothing, working double shifts, and eating sandwiches I brought from home because restaurants were a luxury. When Margaret finally had a life of her own, she had Savannah, and Savannah had become a doctor, a physical rehabilitation specialist, the kind of work that asks more of a person than any paycheck can cover. She came by every few weeks, usually unannounced, usually carrying something she'd cooked. No agenda, no angle. She'd sit with me on the porch and we'd drink coffee and watch the water and not feel the need to fill the silence with anything. Margaret used to do the same thing. That Thanksgiving, the last one before everything changed, I had both of them at the table. Derek, Brittany, Savannah, and me. The table was full. The food was good. Derek raised his glass and looked at me with that smile of his and said, "To you, Dad, and everything you've built." I felt my chest fill with something warm, pride maybe, gratitude, the foolishness of a man who should have known better. Brittany raised her glass too, her eyes moving briefly, just briefly toward the paintings on the wall. Savannah caught my eye across the table. She gave me a small, quiet smile that had nothing in it but affection. No calculation, no inventory. I think about that moment now and I understand what I was looking at. Two different kinds of people. Two different reasons for being at my table. And me sitting at the head of it, unable to tell them apart. 3 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, I got behind the wheel of my SUV on a rainy March morning. That was the last time I ever walked on my own 2 feet. But the rain, I would later learn, might not have been the only thing that made that road so dangerous. Tuesday, March 14th, started the way most of my mornings did, coffee on the porch. The ocean still gray in the early light, the oak tree dripping from the night's rain. The weather advisory on my phone said heavy precipitation through noon. I checked it, set the phone face down, and finished my coffee anyway. I had a 9 o'clock meeting with the regional director of a logistics company out of Colombia. A contract renewal. The kind of meeting I'd done 1,000 times and could do in my sleep. I told myself the rain would ease up by the time I hit Highway 17. I told myself I had driven that road in worse. Both of those things turned out to be wrong. The Lincoln Navigator was in the garage, the big black one, not the Mustang or the Corvette. A practical car for a rainy day. It had gone in for its scheduled maintenance the week before, and the shop had sent it back with a full report, brakes in excellent condition, tires with good tread depth, all fluids topped off. There was nothing on that service record that should have made me hesitate. I remember pulling out of the driveway. I remember the sound the wipers made, that rhythmic scrape against the windshield. I remember calling my office manager, a woman named Dottie, who had worked with me for 19 years, to confirm the meeting room was set up. "Already done, Mr. Kane," she said. "You want me to grab you a coffee from downstairs?" "I'll get my own when I'm there," I told her. "Shouldn't be more than 40 minutes. It was the last phone call I made as a man who could stand on his own 2 feet. Highway 17 was wet and dark, the kind of dark that happens when cloud cover kills the morning light, and everything looks like it's been washed in gray. I was moving at a reasonable speed, maybe 55, maybe 60. I know that stretch of road like the back of my hand. I have driven it through hurricanes and ice storms and every kind of weather the low country can throw at a man. But somewhere around the long curve before the Isle of Palms connector, I felt something wrong. It is difficult to explain to someone who has never felt it. The steering didn't pull, it was more like it hesitated. Like the front wheels had lost their conversation with the road for just a half second too long. I eased off the accelerator. I tried to correct. And then the car simply stopped doing what I was telling it to do. In the seconds that followed, everything happened in a language I couldn't speak fast enough to understand. The rear end went first. Then the whole vehicle rotated slowly, terribly slowly. And then the guardrail was coming at me from the wrong direction. And then there was nothing but noise and glass, and the feeling of the world tilting over on its side. I woke up in a hospital bed at MUSC Health 3 days later. The ceiling was white. The lights were too bright. Someone had put a blanket over me that was too thin and too short. My first coherent thought was that I needed to call Dottie about the 9 o'clock meeting. My second thought was that something was wrong with my legs, not pain exactly, but an absence. Like trying to dial a number and getting only static. "Dad." Derek's voice came from my left. I turned my head slowly. He was sitting in the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, face arranged into something that looked like relief. "Dad, you're awake. Thank God." "What happened?" My voice came out thin and dry. "You were in an accident on 17, he said. The car went off the road. A truck driver saw it and called 911. He leaned forward and put his hand over mine on the blanket. "You've been out for 3 days. "My legs," I said. He didn't answer right away. He looked toward the door instead, like he was hoping someone else would walk through it. Then he said, "The doctor is going to come talk to you. Just rest, okay? I'm here." The doctor came an hour later. A tall man named Whitfield, soft-spoken, the kind of calm that comes from delivering difficult news so many times it becomes a skill. He explained what had happened to my spine. The fractures at L1 and L2, the first and second lumbar vertebrae, the section of the lower back that controls sensation and movement in the legs. He used words like incomplete injury and residual function and long-term rehabilitation, but underneath all of it was the one sentence he finally said plainly. "Mr. Kane, you will not regain full use of your legs. I want to be honest with you about that, even though I know it's not what you want to hear." I stared at the ceiling for a long time after he left. Derek stayed. He brought flowers the next morning. Yellow chrysanthemums in a plastic vase, the kind you buy from the hospital gift shop in a hurry. The nurses commented on them. "What a thoughtful son." He smiled at that, squeezed my arm, said he was taking care of everything. "The business?" I asked. "I'm handling it," he said. "Don't worry about any of that. You just focus on getting better." "Dottie." I called Dottie. "She's got it covered. Everything is fine." He said everything is fine the way some people say it, not as a report, but as a door closing. Savannah came on the 3rd day after I woke up. She didn't bring flowers. She brought a container of homemade soup, butternut squash, still warm in a mason jar she'd wrapped in a kitchen towel. She set it on the bedside table, pulled the chair close, and sat down without saying anything for a moment. Then she looked at me the way Margaret used to look at me, straight on without flinching. "How bad is the pain?" she asked. "Manageable," I said. "On a scale of 1 to 10, 6. Don't lie to me, Uncle Walt." My eyes went hot and I turned my face toward the window. 7, I said. "Maybe 8. She nodded and made a note in the small pad she carried everywhere. "I'm going to talk to your rehab team tomorrow morning. I want to look at your PT plan." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." She tucked the notepad away and folded her hands in her lap. "That's why I'm doing it." Outside in the corridor, I heard Derek's voice, that smooth, assured tone he used with people he was trying to impress. He was talking to one of the nurses, laughing about something. Charming as ever. I looked at the chrysanthemums on the windowsill. Then I looked at the mason jar of soup beside my bed, still warm. I had always believed I was a good judge of character. I had built an entire company on my ability to read people to know. Within 5 minutes of a handshake, what kind of person was standing across from me? Sitting in that hospital bed with my legs that no longer answered when I called, and my chest full of something I couldn't name yet, I began to wonder for the first time if I had been looking at my son with my hopes instead of my eyes. In the days that followed, Derek came to the hospital every single morning. The nurses called him a devoted son. The other patients' families looked at him with envy, and I believed every second of it. I had no reason not to. Not yet. The hospital room on the 7th floor of MUSC Health became my whole world for 6 weeks. The same white ceiling every morning. The same low hum of the monitors. The same view of Charleston Harbor through the window, cargo ships moving slow and steady in the distance, indifferent to everything happening on dry land. Pain medication kept the edges of everything soft and blurred, like a photograph taken through foggy glass. But Derek was always there, sharp and clear, every single morning without fail. He brought coffee from the good place 2 blocks away, not the hospital cafeteria. He remembered I took it black. He sat beside the bed and read me the sports scores from his phone, knowing I didn't particularly care about sports, but doing it anyway because it filled the silence in a way that felt companionable. The nurses adored him. Every time he walked in, there was a chorus of good mornings. And isn't he wonderful? And you raised him right, Mr. Kane. I ate it up. God help me, I ate every single bite of it. Brittany came once that first week, a Wednesday afternoon, I think, though the days blurred together under the morphine. She wore a cream-colored blouse and carried a small bouquet of white lilies that she set on the windowsill without asking if I liked lilies. She sat in the chair across the room, not beside the bed across the room, and spent most of the visit looking at her phone with her thumb moving in slow, scrolling loops. "How are you feeling, Walter?" she asked, not looking up. "Like a man who drove his car off a highway," I said. She laughed. A short, polished sound like something she kept in a drawer for occasions that required it. "Derek is so worried about you," she said. "He barely slept this week." "He doesn't need to worry," I said. "I've survived worse." She looked up then, and something moved behind her eyes fast, like a fish turning in deep water. Then the smile came back, precise as ever. "Of course you have," she said. "You're Walter Kane." She left after 40 minutes. The lilies dropped their first petals by Thursday. Savannah came that Friday. No announcement, no bouquet. She pushed through the door at 4:30 in the afternoon, carrying a canvas tote bag and wearing the kind of tired that comes from a 12-hour shift on your feet. She set the bag on the chair, pulled out a mason jar of butternut squash soup, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel, and placed it beside my water cup without ceremony. "You don't have to keep doing this," I told her. "I'm aware of that," she said, pulling the other chair close and dropping into it. She pressed the back of her hand against her forehead, for a moment exhaled, then looked at me. "Eat the soup, Uncle Walt. The hospital food in this place tastes like a liability waiver." I laughed. The first real laugh since the accident. It pulled at my ribs and I winced, but I laughed. She spent 2 hours with me that afternoon. She looked at my chart with the focused attention of someone who knows what she's reading and doesn't like what she sees. She asked the evening nurse 3 specific questions about my pain management protocol and wrote the answers down in that small notepad she carried everywhere. She did not tell me everything was going to be fine. She did not tell me not to worry. She told me what the next 6 months of rehabilitation were likely to look like, in honest and direct language, and then she asked me which part scared me most. "Losing my independence," I said. She nodded. "That's the most common answer." She tapped her pen against the notepad. and the most solvable one if you're willing to work. I've been working since I was 17 years old, I said. Then you already know how to do hard things. She tucked the notepad away. I'll be here Friday afternoons. Every week. Don't argue with me about it. I didn't argue. In the hallway outside my room that evening, I heard Derek's voice. He had come by for his evening visit and crossed paths with Savannah near the nurse's station. I couldn't hear everything, just the tone of it. Derek's voice was smooth and warm, the way it always was, the kind of warmth you feel through a window present, but not quite touching. Savannah's responses were short, direct. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes before I heard her footsteps heading toward the elevator. Derek came in smiling. Your niece is something else, he said. She's thorough, I said. She's a little intense, don't you think? He settled into the chair and handed me the coffee he'd brought, even though it was almost 7 in the evening and I hadn't been sleeping well. She was asking the nurse all kinds of questions about your chart, like she was auditing the place. She's a doctor, I said. That's what doctors do. Derek shrugged and pulled out his phone. I just don't want her stressing you out, that's all. You need rest, not someone grilling your nursing team. I looked at him over the rim of the cup. There was something in the way he said it, not concern exactly. Something that sat just beneath concern wearing concern's clothing. But I pushed the thought away. The morphine made everything feel slightly off-center, and I had learned not to trust my own instincts when my head was full of it. 3 days later, Derek came in with a different kind of smile. Businesslike. Organized. He was carrying a manila folder which he set on the rolling tray table beside my bed and opened with the crisp efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this moment. I need you to sign a few things, he said. Just a temporary authorization, so I can handle the business accounts and the property management while you're recovering. Standard stuff. Theo would normally handle it, but I figured we could keep it simple. Theo Hargrove was my attorney of 22 years. The fact that Derek wanted to keep him out of it should have been the first alarm bell. But my head was thick with medication, and the document in front of me was a blur of legal language that my eyes couldn't quite pin down. What exactly does it cover? I asked, frowning at the pages. Just the usual. Bills, contracts, anything that needs a signature while you're in here. He uncapped a pen and held it out. It's a standard limited power of attorney, Dad. I had it drafted this morning. I took the pen. My hand felt heavy and distant, like it belonged to someone else. The signature I put on the bottom of that page was shakier than any signature I'd made in 40 years of business, tilted to the left, the pressure uneven. A signature that no one who knew my handwriting would have recognized as mine. Derek picked up the folder, tapped it once against the tray table to straighten the pages, and slid it under his arm. Thank you, he said. Now stop worrying. I've got everything handled. He said it the same way he'd said it the day I woke up. I've got everything handled. That weekend, while I lay in that hospital bed trying to remember how to move my fingers without wincing, something was happening 14 miles away at Sullivan's Island. Something I wouldn't find out about until much later, and by then it would already be too late to stop it. There are things in this life that break you slowly, like water wearing down stone, so gradual you don't notice until the damage is already deep. And then there are things that break you all at once in a single afternoon in a lawyer's office on King Street, watching a screen that shows you exactly who your son really is. That afternoon came in July, 4 months after the accident. Theo Hargrove had called me the evening before and asked me to come in. He said he had pulled something from the cloud server connected to my home security system, something I needed to see in person. He didn't explain further. Theo never oversold things. The fact that he wanted me there in person told me enough. Savannah drove me. She parked the car, helped me navigate the wheelchair up the ramp to Theo's building on King Street, and rode the elevator with me to the second floor without saying much. She had learned over those months when talking helped, and when it didn't. Theo was waiting in his office with the door open. He was 70 years old and still had the posture of a man who had never once slouched, not even in private. He shook my hand, nodded to Savannah, and gestured to the chairs across from his desk. On his monitor, a video player was already open, paused on a dark, grainy image of my front driveway. "Before I play this," Theo said, settling into his chair, "I want you to understand what you're looking at. This footage came from the cloud backup server connected to your home security system at Sullivan's Island. The contract runs through 2025. Whoever was in that house had no idea the cameras were still uploading remotely." I leaned forward in my wheelchair. "How much footage?" "6 weeks of it. From the night after your accident until the day before your discharge." He folded his hands on the desk. "Walter, I need you to prepare yourself." "Play it," I said. The timestamp in the corner read March 16th, 2023, 11:47 p.m. Savannah leaned forward in her chair. That's 2 days after the accident. You were still in intensive care." "Keep watching," Theo said quietly. The headlights swept across the gate first. Then the gate opened, the code Derek had, the gate code he'd always had, the gate code, and a white box truck backed slowly up the driveway toward the front entrance. Unmarked. No company logo. The kind of truck you hire when you don't want anyone asking questions. My throat tightened. Derek came out the front door in dark clothes. Jeans, a black jacket. Not the pressed son who brought hospital coffee every morning. Behind him came 2 men, large, efficient, the kind of men who are paid by the hour and don't ask anything beyond, "Where do you want it?" "That's the living room painting," I said. My voice came out strange, hollow. "The seascape. I bought that in '98. "I know," Theo said. "I watched 2 strangers carry it through my front door and load it into the back of a truck at midnight." My hands balled into fists in my lap so hard, my knuckles went white and aching. "How much did he get for it?" Theo opened a folder on his desk. $11,000. Its appraised value is closer to 45. He didn't want a fair price. The words came out flat. He wanted fast. That's correct. Savannah had gone very still beside me. The kind of still that comes not from calm, but from the opposite of calm, from something that has locked itself down because it had no safe place to go. Her eyes were bright and wet at the corners, and she blinked hard twice, refusing to let it spill over. "Uncle Walt." "Keep it running," I told Theo. He advanced the footage. The Patek Philippe display case came out on night 2, carried in a padded wooden box that Derek had clearly brought specifically for the purpose. The box had foam cutouts, custom fitted. He had measured the case beforehand. "He planned this down to the packaging," I said. "Yes." Theo's voice was careful and even. "This was not a spontaneous decision." "The watches," I said. 30 years, 12 watches. 1 for every milestone I'd thought was worth marking. What did he get? Theo turned a page in the folder. Combined sale price $92,000. Combined appraised value approximately $230,000. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. Opened them. Keep going. The Mustang went on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Loaded onto a flatbed carrier in the gray pre-dawn, while my neighborhood was still dark and sleeping. I watched the man hook up the chains around the tires of a car I had bought when I was 26 years old, with money I had saved for 2 years, with hands that still had grease under the fingernails from the job I'd worked to save it. "Walter." Savannah's voice cracked on the second syllable. She reached across and put her hand over mine on the armrest. "You don't have to watch all of it." "Yes, I do," I said. "I need to know all of it." She squeezed my hand once and didn't argue. Then Brittany appeared on the screen and something shifted in the room, the temperature, the air, something. She was standing just inside the front doorway with a clipboard pressed against her chest, pen in hand. Moving from room to room, checking, marking, not rushing, not looking over her shoulder. Utterly composed. "What is she doing?" Savannah asked, though I think she already knew. She's running inventory, I said. The words tasted like rust in my mouth. She's making sure nothing gets missed. Theo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There is one more clip. The last one is from the upstairs hallway camera. Daytime, April." He advanced the footage again. The timestamp read April 8th, mid-morning. Derek sat at my desk, my chair, my study, my life, and opened the center drawer. He pulled out the dark green folder, the one I kept because it held the master list of every account, every share allocation, every financial instrument tied to Kane Freight and Logistics. He laid it open on the desk, pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, and began photographing pages, one by one, slow and careful, making sure each image was sharp before moving to the next. The room was so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning unit in Theo's window. He wasn't panicking, I said. No, Theo agreed. He wasn't improvising. He wasn't reacting. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my temples. He had been planning this. The evidence strongly suggests the preparation began before the accident, Theo said. He said it the way a doctor says a diagnosis clearly directly without softening the edges, because softening them doesn't change what they are. Savannah turned to look at me. Her eyes were red now, 2 patches of color high on her cheeks. "Uncle Walt," she said, and her voice broke open on the words, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said. My own eyes burned, that deep, slow burn behind the sockets that comes right before a man decides whether he's going to cry or whether he's going to hold the line. I held the line. Barely. Being sorry doesn't get any of it back. Theo closed the folder on his desk and folded his hands on top of it. He looked at me steadily, the way he had looked at me across that same desk for 22 years. "No," he said. "But the law might." By the time I was discharged from MUSC Health 6 weeks after the accident, the house I had spent 30 years filling with a life was empty. Not just of furniture, of everything that proved I had ever lived there at all. And Derek was waiting at the door, not to welcome me home. The discharge paperwork said I was stable enough to go home. I filled out the address on the form without thinking. 40 years of muscle memory, the handwriting Sullivan's Island, before the brain had time to catch up with what was waiting there. A volunteer pushed my wheelchair to the front entrance of MUSC Health, and a car service Savannah had arranged pulled up to the curb right on time. The driver was a quiet man in his 50s named Ray, who asked me once if I needed help with my seatbelt, accepted my no thank you without argument, and spent the 40-minute drive listening to low country blues on a station that faded in and out near the bridge. I was grateful for the silence. I had been practicing what I might say when I got there, running through versions in my head, the way you do when you know a conversation is coming and you want to be ready for it. None of the versions I practiced came close to what actually happened. The sky over Sullivan's Island had been threatening rain all morning. By the time Ray turned onto my street, the first drops were hitting the windshield. Fat, slow drops, the kind that feel heavy when they land on your skin. The oak tree in my front yard was dripping already, its big arms dark with moisture leaves trembling in the wet wind coming off the water. The gate was closed. Ray pulled up alongside it and looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You need me to wait?" "No," I said. "Thank you, Ray." He unloaded my wheelchair from the trunk, helped me transfer into it with steady, practiced hands, and set the small bag, the discharge bag the nurses had packed, a canvas thing with the hospital logo on it, containing exactly what I had arrived with in the ambulance, on my lap. Then he got back in the car and pulled away. I pressed the call button on the gate panel. It took almost 2 minutes, long enough that I wondered if anyone was home. Long enough for the rain to pick up fat drops, becoming a proper Charleston spring rain, the kind that soaks through a jacket in under a minute. My hands were wet on the wheels of the chair. Then the front door opened and Derek came out. He was dressed well. Of course he was. Gray slacks, a collared shirt, the kind of effortless put together that takes more effort than people admit. He walked down the front path toward the gate without hurrying, his hands in his pockets, his face arranged into something I had never seen on him before, not anger, not embarrassment. Something flat and decided. Something that had already finished a conversation I hadn't known we were having. He stopped on the other side of the iron bars. He did not open the gate. "Derek," my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Open the gate, son." He looked at me the way you look at a problem you've already solved. "Dad," he said, and the word sounded different in his mouth than it ever had before. Not warm, not deferential, just a label. "We need to talk." "Then let me in and we'll talk." He took his hands out of his pockets and crossed his arms over his chest. "I don't think that's a good idea." The rain was coming down harder now. I could feel it soaking through the shoulders of my jacket, cold and steady. My hands gripped the wheel rims of the chair. "What are you saying to me right now?" "I'm saying the situation has changed." He kept his voice low and even the way a man keeps his voice when he wants to sound reasonable, even though what he's saying is not reasonable at all. "You can't manage a property like this anymore, Dad. You can't climb the stairs. You can't drive. You need a level of care that—" "I need you to open this gate," I said. My jaw was tight. My chest felt like something was pushing against the inside of it, trying to get out. "This is my home. I built this home." "The property has been transferred," he said. The rain stopped mattering. The cold stopped mattering. Everything went very still inside me. "Say that again." "While you were in this hospital, I handled the necessary transfers. It's all legal, Dad. You signed the authorization." "I signed a power of attorney for business accounts," I said. My voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping something much larger contained. "Not for the house. Not for any of this." Derek unfolded his arms and reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a folded paper and held it through the bars pinched between two fingers, the way you'd offer something to an animal at a fence. "It's all outlined here. If you want to dispute it, that's your right. But tonight this isn't your house to come back to." I didn't take the paper. I looked at his face instead, the face I had watched take its first breath, had watched learn to walk in this very yard, had watched graduate and marry and become the man standing on the other side of this gate right now. I searched it for something. A crack. A flinch. Anything that proved there was still a person in there who understood what he was doing. His face gave me nothing. "I have nowhere to go," I said. The words cost me something I didn't have much left to spend. "There are facilities," Derek said. "Good ones. I've looked into it. Places that specialize in facilities." The word came out of my mouth like something rotten. "You're talking about putting your father in a facility." He had the decency to look away. Just briefly. Just enough to tell me he knew what this was and was choosing to do it anyway. Then he looked back and his voice dropped to something quieter, and what he said next, I have turned those words over in my hands every day since the way you turn a stone that's sharp enough to cut. "Dad, you don't have legs anymore. What does a man in a wheelchair need a mansion like this for?" He paused. "I can't carry a burden. I have my own life to think about." The front door opened behind him. Brittany stepped out onto the porch with her arms folded across her chest. She didn't come down to the gate. She just stood there watching her expression, as composed as a woman who had already decided this conversation was beneath her attention. Derek looked at me one last time. Then he turned and walked back up the path. He went inside. The door closed behind him. I heard the deadbolt slide home, that flat, mechanical sound, the sound of a lock in a door that used to be mine. I sat in the rain. The oak tree dripped. The street was empty. The water soaked through my lap blanket, through my slacks. and I just sat there with my hands open on the wheels of the chair, staring at the iron bars in front of me and the dark windows of the house behind them. I had built this home with 40 years of my life. I had planted that oak tree as a sapling with a shovel I still owned, and now I was sitting outside it in the rain, like a stranger who had rung the wrong bell. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to settle deep into my shoulders. Long enough to understand that what had just happened was real and final, and not a misunderstanding that a phone call could fix. I didn't know it then, but someone had been watching. Not Derek. Not Brittany. Someone who had driven past Sullivan's Island that afternoon on her way home from a 12-hour shift and had seen through the rain an old man sitting alone in a wheelchair in front of a locked gate. The headlights hit me first. A car slowing on the wet street behind me, pulling to the curb with the kind of deliberate care that tells you the driver saw something that stopped them. A door opening. Footsteps on wet pavement, quick and purposeful. And then Savannah was crouching down in front of my wheelchair in the rain, both hands on the armrests, looking up into my face. She was still in her scrubs from the hospital. Her hair was plastered to her forehead from the 30 seconds it had taken her to get from the car to me. She took one look at my face, at whatever was written on it that I could not have described to you even now. And she did not say, "Oh my God," or "What happened," or "Are you okay?" What she said was, "You're coming with me." She stood up, released the brake on the wheelchair, turned it around, and pushed me toward her car without waiting for an answer. Which was good, because I didn't have one. My hands were cold and stiff on my lap, and the only coherent thought in my head was the sound of that deadbolt sliding home. That flat, final sound. Savannah got me into the passenger seat, folded the wheelchair, loaded it in the trunk, with an efficiency that told me she had done this kind of thing before, not exactly this, but the physical logistics of moving a person who cannot move themselves. She did it without fuss and without commentary. She got in the driver's seat, turned the heat up high, and pulled away from Sullivan's Island without looking back at the gate. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. The rain hammered the roof of the car. The wipers swept back and forth. The heater clicked and hummed. And then somewhere on the bridge heading into North Charleston, Savannah said, "Tell me what he said." My throat tightened. "You don't want to hear it." "I do," she said. Her voice was calm the way it was calm when she was working steady on the surface, paying careful attention underneath. "Tell me exactly what he said." So I told her. Every word. The gate that didn't open. The paper held through the bars. The word facilities said the way Derek said it, like a solution, like a kindness, like he was doing me a favor by suggesting somewhere that could manage the inconvenience of me. And the last thing. The thing that had burrowed into my chest and was sitting there still sharp and cold. When I finished, Savannah's hands tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles went pale. Her jaw was set hard, the muscle along the side of her face pulling tight. "He said you were a burden," she said. "Not a question." "He said he couldn't carry one," I said. "Same thing." Her voice cracked on the second word, just the smallest fracture, like a hairline split in something that was otherwise holding together through sheer force of will. She pressed her lips together for a moment, and I watched her pull herself back. "Okay," she said. "Okay. You're staying with me." "Savannah, don't argue with me right now, Uncle Walt. I'm asking you not to argue with me right now." I looked out the window at the wet lights of the highway. The cars moving past. The ordinary world going all on in every direction, indifferent and continuous. "I don't want to be a burden to you either," I said. And I meant it. That was the thing Derek had aimed at, and it had landed somewhere tender. Savannah made a sound, a short, fierce exhale that was as close to profanity as she ever got. "You are not a burden," she said. "You are my family, And there is a difference, and I need you to understand that difference right now. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building in North Charleston, a one-bedroom place, small and clean, with medical textbooks stacked on every flat surface, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and something herbal she kept in a pot on the windowsill. She had a pull-out couch in the living room that she made up with fresh sheets before I had time to protest, moving quickly and efficiently, tucking hospital corners the way our mother had taught both her mother and me when we were children. I looked around the small living room while she worked. And then I saw it. On the wall above the bookshelf, a photograph in a simple wood frame, small, faded at the edges, the colors softened by time. Me and Margaret, maybe 30 years ago. She was laughing at something I had said, her head thrown back, and I had my arm around her shoulders, younger and thinner, and grinning like a fool. I hadn't seen that photograph in years. I had forgotten it existed. "Where did you get that?" I asked. Savannah looked up from the couch. "Mom kept it on her nightstand," she said. "Right up until the end." She smoothed the last corner of the fitted sheet and straightened up. "She talked about you all the time, you know. About how you worked double shifts when you were 19 so she could have a winter coat. About the time you drove 6 hours to bring her home from a boyfriend situation that had gone badly." She picked up a spare blanket from the closet and shook it out over the couch. "She said you were the reason she believed people could be good." My eyes burned. That deep, slow burn behind the sockets that I had been fighting off all afternoon. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed through it, willing the feeling back down. "She never told me that," I managed. "She didn't want you to get a big head about it." Savannah said it dry and straight-faced, and in spite of everything, in spite of the rain still streaking the windows and the deadbolt sound still sitting in my chest, I laughed. Short and rough and genuine, she smiled. The first real smile I had seen all day. Then she pulled a chair up across from me and sat down, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, looking at me directly the way Margaret always had. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'll be here every morning before my shift. We'll do your PT exercises. I'll adjust your medication schedule to something that actually makes sense. And on Friday afternoons, I'll cook." "You don't have to do all that," I said. "I know I don't have to." She held my gaze steady. "You raised my mother when she had nothing and no one. You worked yourself half to death so she could have a coat in January. And you never once made her feel like she owed you for it." She leaned back in the chair and crossed her arms, not defensively, but firmly, the way a person sits when they've made up their mind and are done negotiating. "So don't you dare sit there and tell me this is too much. It is nowhere near enough. And that's the end of the discussion." I looked at her for a long moment, at Margaret's eyes, in a younger face, at the same straight-backed certainty that her mother had carried all her life. Something in my chest that had been clenched tight since the deadbolt began very slowly to loosen. "All right," I said. "All right." She nodded once. "Good. Now let me heat up some soup." Those weeks that followed were the quietest kind of hard. The kind of hard that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up every morning and asks you to get through the day. The PT exercises were brutal and slow, and there were mornings I lay on the mat on Savannah's living room floor and thought about the man who used to walk up 3 flights of stairs without a second thought, and I had to make a choice about whether I was going to grieve that man or get on with the business of being whoever came next. Savannah never let me stay on the floor too long. "Again," she'd say in that quiet, immovable voice, and I would go again. One morning in late May, she came in before her shift with a paper grocery bag and started making breakfast without asking. I sat at the kitchen table watching her move around the small space with the comfortable ease of someone who has learned to make do with whatever room she has. On the table beside me was the pile of mail she had been collecting and sorting: bills, medical statements, the ordinary paperwork of a life being rebuilt from nothing. And then at the bottom of the pile, an envelope I didn't recognize. The return address said Coastal Life Insurance. The name on it was mine. I didn't remember ever doing business with Coastal Life Insurance. My hands had gone very still before I even opened it. "Savannah," I said. My voice came out different, lower, slower. "Come look at this." She turned from the stove. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, took the envelope from my hands, and read the return address. Something shifted in her face, that careful clinical composure, pulling tighter over something that moved underneath it. "Open it," she said. The envelope tore open easily, the way cheap paper does when it's been sitting in a mailbox through a humid Carolina morning. Inside was a document, 8 pages, stapled at the corner, dense with legal language in a font size that assumed you had better eyes than I do. The letterhead said Coastal Life Insurance Company. The policy number was printed in bold at the top. My name was on it. Walter Raymond Kane, insured party. Savannah leaned over my shoulder and read the first page with me. I heard her breath change, a small, sharp intake, like someone who has just stepped on something unexpected in the dark. "The beneficiary," I said. My finger found the line. "Read it." "Derek James Kane," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet and very careful, the way voices go when the words coming out of them are dangerous. "Sole beneficiary." She straightened up. $15 million. I set the document down on the table. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. "I have never done business with Coastal Life Insurance," I said. "Not once in 68 years. The signature date." She pointed to the bottom of page 1. "March 22nd, 2023. I looked at it. March 22nd. 8 days after the accident. 4 days after my second surgery, when I had been running on morphine, and the world had the soft, unreliable texture of a half-remembered dream. "I was still in intensive care," I said. "I know." Savannah pulled out the chair across from me and sat down hard, like her legs had made the decision before she did. She pressed both palms flat on the table and stared at the document. "Uncle Walt, your signature on this. Derek got this signed while you were on morphine. Can that be undone?" She looked up at me. "That's not a question I can answer, but I know someone who can." She was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling Theo." Theo Hargrove had been my attorney for 22 years. He was the kind of man who had seen enough of human nature to be unsurprisable, and whose office on King Street looked exactly the way a serious lawyer's office should look. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with case law, a desk that had absorbed 40 years of difficult conversations, and windows that let in just enough Charleston light to remind you the world outside was still turning even when yours felt like it had stopped. When Savannah and I arrived that afternoon, he was standing at his window, with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the street below. He turned when we came in, shook my hand, nodded to Savannah, and waited until we were seated before he sat down himself. Then he held out his hand for the document. He read it the way Theo read everything, completely, without rushing, without performing. Turning pages, going back, underlining things with his finger. When he finished, he set it on the desk and looked at me. "Do you remember signing this?" he asked. "No," I said. "I don't remember it at all." "March 22nd. He tapped the signature date. "Your surgical records from MUSC Health show you were administered post-operative morphine at 6 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. that day. Standard protocol for the level of spinal trauma you sustained." He paused. "A signature obtained while the signatory is under significant narcotic influence is legally vulnerable, Walter. In plain language, this contract may not be worth the paper it's printed on." Something loosened in my chest. Just slightly. Just enough to breathe. "Can we fight it?" "We can do considerably more than fight it." Theo picked up the document and set it in a folder he had already labeled, which told me he had been thinking about this before we arrived. "But I need you to understand something. This insurance policy is not the whole picture. A $15 million policy on a 68-year-old man with a serious spinal injury. Derek isn't waiting for you to die of old age, Walter. He let that sit in the air between us. This is a policy with a purpose. Savannah's hand found my forearm and gripped it. Hard. He's going to try to collect it, I said. The words felt like stones in my mouth. The policy has a standard 2-year contestability period and a 12-month waiting period before accidental death claims can be filed, which means Derek has a timeline. Theo's eyes were steady and calm on mine, the way a man's eyes are when he's known something for longer than he's letting on. And so do we. He folded his hands on the desk. Then he said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since, because it changed the shape of everything that came after. Walter, he said, they think they took everything from you, but I don't think they checked carefully enough. I stared at him. What does that mean? He almost smiled. Not quite. Theo was not a man who smiled easily. But something shifted at the corner of his mouth, a private satisfaction, the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to say a specific thing. Come back next week, he said. I need to pull some files from storage. Very old files. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting with the unhurried authority of someone who is never rushed. And in the meantime, tell no one. Not a word to Derek, not to anyone in his orbit. He looked at Savannah. That includes well-meaning people. Savannah raised both eyebrows. I don't have a word to say to Derek Kane. Good. Theo walked us to the door. Neither do I, yet. In the elevator on the way down, Savannah looked at me. What do you think he meant? She asked. About checking carefully enough. I don't know, I said. And that was the truth. But the way Theo had said it, calm, almost amused, like a man who had just remembered he was holding the best hand at the table, made something in my chest shift from cold to something else entirely. Something I had not felt since before the accident. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Theo called me on a Thursday morning in early July, just over a month after our first meeting about the insurance policy. He said 2 things: come at 2 o'clock and bring Savannah. He never said bring Savannah unless it mattered. The July heat in Charleston is a physical thing. It presses against you the moment you step outside. Thick and salt-heavy, the kind of heat that slows everything down and makes the city look like it's dreaming. Savannah drove with the air conditioning on full and both hands on the wheel, and neither of us talked much on the way over. We had both learned that some conversations were better saved for after you knew what you were walking into. Theo's office looked the same as always, books light, the smell of old paper and wood polish. But on his desk next to the usual folders there was a cardboard box. Old. The kind of box that comes from a storage facility, brown and slightly soft at the corners, with dust in the creases, and a label on the side written in handwriting I recognized as Theo's from 20 years ago. The label said, Kane Trust Document 2008. I felt something move in my memory. Dim and far away like a light in a fog. Sit down, Theo said. He waited until we were settled, then he put both hands on the box and looked at me directly. Walter, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to reach back as far as you can. Do you remember coming to see me in the spring of 2008? I pressed my fingers together and thought. 2008. Eleanor had been gone since October of 2012. No, that was wrong. Earlier. 2010. And before that, yes. The year after Derek had turned 19. The year I had started noticing things about my son that I didn't know how to name. A coldness. A calculation. A habit of adding things up with his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. I remember, I said slowly. I came to you after Eleanor's first health scare, before we knew how serious it was. That's correct. Theo opened the box. Inside was a document thick bound with a black clip, the pages slightly yellowed at the edges. He lifted it out with the careful hands of a man handling something that matters. You asked me to establish a revocable living trust. You said you wanted to protect the estate not from taxes, not from creditors, from a person. He set the document on the desk between us. You didn't name the person. You didn't have to. Savannah leaned forward in her chair. Her eyes moved between Theo's face and the document on the desk, quick and sharp. What kind of trust? She asked. Oh, a standard revocable living trust, Theo said, with one non-standard provision. He opened the document to a page marked with a yellow tab, the paper soft and slightly warm from the box. He turned it so I could read it. Page 7, Clause 11. Read it aloud, if you would, Walter. I pulled the document closer. My reading glasses were in my breast pocket. I put them on and found the clause. In the event that any named beneficiary is found to have engaged in or is formally investigated for acts of fraud, financial exploitation, undue influence, or intentional harm directed toward the grantor, said beneficiary shall be automatically and irrevocably disqualified from any and all rights of inheritance under this trust, without requirement of separate legal proceeding. I stopped. My mouth had gone dry. I read it again silently, just to be sure the words said what I thought they said. Savannah sat back slowly in her chair. She did not say anything for a moment. Then quietly, he has no idea this exists. Her voice was not disbelieving. It was something colder than that, the voice of someone who has just realized the trap was set long before anyone walked into it. He has no idea this exists. None, Theo said. His voice was as even as a man reading a weather report. Derek was never informed of the trust's specific provisions. He knows a trust exists. I believe he assumed it was a standard inheritance instrument, with him as primary beneficiary. He has never asked to see the actual document. He picked up his pen, turned it once in his fingers, which is a significant oversight on his part. I looked up from the page. My heart was doing something strange, not pounding, not racing, but beating with a slow, heavy insistence like a fist knocking on a door that had been locked for a very long time. Theo, I said, everything Derek has done, the asset sales, the insurance policy, the power of attorney, every single one of those actions falls squarely within the parameters of Clause 11, Theo said. Financial exploitation, undue influence, intentional harm. He laid his pen down on the desk with a quiet click. The moment Derek is formally investigated for any of those acts, and we are going to make certain he loses everything, automatically, no separate proceeding required. The room felt different suddenly. The same books, the same light, the same worn desk, but the air had changed the way air changes before a storm rolls in off the Atlantic. Something enormous and inevitable moving toward the shore. 15 years? I said. My voice came out rough. I signed this 15 years ago and then I stopped, shook my head. I hoped I'd never need it. Theo's expression shifted just slightly, just enough to show something human underneath the professional composure. I know, he said quietly. You told me that when you signed it. You said you hoped you were being paranoid. He paused. You weren't. Savannah reached over and took my hand. Her grip was warm and firm, and I held onto it the way a man holds onto something solid when the ground is moving under him. Her eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, but with something pressurized, something that needed the pressure, because if it let go, it would become something much larger. So what do we do now? She asked Theo. Now, he said, we build the case. The trust is the foundation. It tells us what the outcome will be once we establish the conduct. But to trigger the clause, we need documented proof of Derek's actions. Not just our testimony, evidence. He picked up another folder from the desk, thinner, newer the paper, crisp and white. Which brings me to the second reason I asked you both here today. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, grainy time-stamped, printed on plain white paper. He turned them to face me. Before we do anything else, Walter, you need to see what was captured in your garage the night before the accident. My eyes dropped to the photographs. The timestamp in the corner of the first image read March 13th, 2023, 11:47 p.m., the night before the crash on Highway 17. I leaned in. My glasses were still on. I looked at the image carefully, and my blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Theo," I said, and my voice came out barely above a whisper. "Who is that in my garage?" Theo looked at me steadily. He did not look away. "That," he said, "is exactly what we need to talk about. Before I show you what Theo found in those photographs, I need to know you're still with me. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now so I know who's still in this room. Because what I'm about to reveal changes everything you thought you knew about that accident on Highway 17. One thing worth knowing before we go further: this story contains fictional elements woven in for dramatic and educational purposes. Some details may not reflect any single real event. If that's not the kind of story you're here for, this is a good moment to step away. But if you're staying, hold on tight. Theo placed the photographs on the desk one at a time, in order the way you lay out a hand of cards when you want the other person to understand the sequence before they understand the meaning. 6 images printed on plain white paper, slightly grainy the way security footage always is, but clear enough. The timestamp burned into the lower right corner of each one read March 13th, 2023, the night before I drove my Lincoln Navigator off Highway 17. The system recorded continuously, Theo said, standing beside the desk, hands clasped behind his back. The garage camera angle covers approximately 90% of the interior. These 6 frames were extracted from a 40-minute window between 11:47 p.m. and 12:27 a.m. Savannah was leaning so far forward in her chair that her elbows were on the desk. Her eyes moved across the photographs, the way eyes move when the brain is working faster than the body can keep up with. I picked up the first image, a figure in the garage, dark clothing, jeans, a black jacket. The overhead light off a handheld flashlight making a pale circle on the floor. The Lincoln Navigator sitting exactly where I always left it, backed into the space the way I had parked it for 20 years. "Who is that?" I asked, though my stomach already knew. "Keep going," Theo said. Second photograph. The figure at the front of the vehicle, both hands on the hood release. Third photograph. The hood up. The figure leaning into the engine compartment, flashlight angled down. My hands had started to tremble. A fine, barely visible tremor, the kind that comes not from weakness, but from the effort of holding something very large, very still. I set the third photograph down carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you're not deliberate about it. "Theo," I said, "tell me what I'm looking at." Theo pulled his chair around and sat beside me rather than across from me, a small thing, but I noticed it. He picked up the third photograph and pointed to the engine compartment. "Voss examined every frame of the garage footage," Theo said. "His conclusion, submitted in a written report under professional certification, is that the individual in those photographs was not performing a routine check. The position of the hands, the duration, the specific area of the engine accessed it is consistent, in Voss's professional opinion, with deliberate interference designed to affect vehicle handling at speed. Interference that would not be detectable under normal driving conditions, but that would become dangerous, potentially catastrophic, at highway velocity on a wet surface." The word overcorrect landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. "Is that what happened to me?" I asked. My voice came out flat and strange. "We cannot confirm that," Theo said carefully. "The vehicle was destroyed in the accident. There is no physical evidence left to examine. What we have is circumstantial, the footage, the timing, the fact that the car had been serviced and cleared just 1 week prior. He set the photograph down. But Walter, the question this footage raises is one that a jury would not dismiss easily. He could have killed you, Savannah said. She said it straight out, no softening, no cushion around the words, because she was a doctor, and she had learned that softening the truth didn't change it. But her voice shook on the last word just slightly, and she pressed her fingers hard against her lips for a moment, as if she could push the feeling back inside. He could have that accident, could have. She stopped, drew one hard breath through her nose. He wasn't waiting for you to get old, Uncle Walt. He was trying to move things along. We don't know that, I said. And I meant it. I genuinely meant it, because there is a part of a father that will always look for the alternative explanation, the one where his child is not a monster. We know he was in the garage. We know he opened the hood. We don't know what he did or why. Look at the fourth photograph, Theo said quietly. I picked it up, the figure straightening up from the engine compartment, closing the hood. And in the upper corner of the frame, partially obscured by the angle, but visible, unmistakably visible, the sleeve of a jacket. Navy blue with a small logo on the left cuff. A sailing club logo. I had given Derek that jacket for his birthday 3 years ago. I had bought it myself at a shop on East Bay Street because he had mentioned once that he liked the style. My chest caved in on itself. Slowly, completely, like a building whose supports have been removed one by one until there is nothing left to hold the structure up. The jacket, I said. Yes, said Theo. I gave him that jacket. I know, said Theo. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the air conditioning and the distant noise of King Street below the window. Savannah had both hands pressed flat on the desk, now staring at the photograph. Her jaw so tight I could see the muscle working along the side of her face. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was not grief. It was something colder and more determined than grief. What do we do with this? She asked Theo. For now, we document it, he said. We have these photographs certified and stored with the original cloud footage as authenticated evidence. We pair them with the vehicle service record from the week prior and the police accident report. He picked up the photographs and slid them back into the folder with practiced care. This alone is not enough to open a criminal investigation. A defense attorney would argue coincidence, curiosity, any number of explanations for a man opening his father's car hood at midnight. But combined with the insurance policy, the asset liquidation, the forged authorization, he closed the folder. It forms a pattern, Walter, and patterns are what prosecutors love most. I sat back in my wheelchair. My hands had stopped trembling, but they felt heavy, like they had absorbed something and didn't know where to put it. I thought about the morning of the accident, the coffee on the porch, the weather advisory on my phone, the decision to drive anyway, because I had made that drive 1,000 times, and I trusted the road, and I trusted the car, and it had never once occurred to me to wonder whether the car itself had been tampered with by someone who had a key to my garage and a reason to want me gone. That night, I said slowly, after whatever he did in that garage, do you know where he was the next morning, when the accident happened? Theo opened his desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. According to the call records your business office provided, Derek called your office manager at 9:14 a.m. on March 14th, 17 minutes after the accident was reported to emergency services, asking whether you had made it to your meeting. He set the sheet down. She told him there had been an accident. He already knew Walter. He called because he needed to hear it confirmed. The air went out of the room. Or maybe it was just out of me. That night, I said finally, lying in Savannah's spare room staring at the ceiling. I thought about Derek's face in the hospital, the flowers, the hand-holding, every single morning for 6 weeks. I looked at Theo. He came every day. While I was in that bed thanking God for my son, he was coming every day. Yes, said Theo, and I never once asked why. My voice had dropped to something I barely recognized as my own. I just thought that was what a good son did. Theo looked at me with the steady, direct eyes of a man who had delivered difficult truths for 4 decades and had never found a way to make them easier. Get some rest tonight, he said. Tomorrow we start building something he cannot dismantle. After that evening in Theo's office, the 3 of us made a decision. We were not going to confront Derek. We were not going to warn him, threaten him, or give him any reason to believe we knew what we knew. We were going to be patient, and we were going to build something he couldn't argue with in any courtroom in the state of South Carolina. That was easier to say than to live. The weeks that followed had a particular kind of tension. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't spike or crash, just sits underneath everything like a low current running through wire. Every time Savannah's phone buzzed, my stomach tightened. Every time I saw an unfamiliar car slow down on her street, something cold moved through me. I was not a man who frightened easily. I had built a company from nothing in a city that didn't make things easy. But knowing what I knew and having to act as though I didn't, that was its own kind of warfare. We met at a coffee shop on Broad Street in early August. A small place, the kind that locals use and tourists walk past, mismatched chairs, good espresso, a back corner table that Theo had clearly chosen in advance because it faced the door and couldn't be approached from behind. He was already there when Savannah and I arrived, a yellow legal pad open in front of him, and a cup of black coffee going cold at his elbow. Good, he said when we sat down. We have a lot to cover. He uncapped his pen and drew 3 columns on the legal pad. At the top of each column, he wrote one word: fraud. Assets. Intent. These are the 3 pillars, he said, tapping each column in turn. Fraud covers the insurance contract and the power of attorney, both signed under conditions that compromise their legal validity. Assets covers the liquidation of your property, 23 transactions, all below market value, all executed while you were incapacitated. Intent. He paused. Intent is the hardest column to fill, and it's the most important one. Because without intent, it's just a family dispute, Savannah said. Correct. A competent defense attorney, and Derek will hire a competent one, make no mistake, will argue that everything he did was within the scope of the authorization you signed. He'll say he was managing your affairs as instructed. He'll say the insurance policy was your idea that you wanted to provide for him. He'll say the asset sales were necessary to cover your medical expenses. Theo looked at me steadily. We need evidence that proves he knew exactly what he was doing and that he intended harm. Not negligence, not bad judgment. Harm. The garage photographs, I said. Circumstantial, Theo said. Powerful but not sufficient on their own. We need something that comes directly from Derek, his own words, his own actions, documented in a way that cannot be explained away. He picked up his coffee, remembered it was cold, and set it back down. Which brings me to the camera. Savannah straightened in her chair. She had known this was coming. We had talked about it in the car on the way over, the 2 of us, before we arrived. But hearing Theo say it out loud made it real in a different way. What kind of camera? I asked. The kind used in home medical monitoring, Savannah said. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. A small device no larger than a shirt button, designed to clip onto a shelf or tuck behind a picture frame. I use them for patients who live alone. They connect to an encrypted Wi-Fi network and stream continuously. Audio and video. She looked at me with steady, serious eyes. I can place one inside the house. My stomach dropped. Savannah, I already have a reason to go in, she said, cutting me off gently but firmly. Derek called me last week. He asked if any of your medical mail was still coming to Sullivan's Island. I told him yes, I'd been collecting it and forwarding it to you. He said I could come by to pick up whatever was left. She put the phone away. He's going to let me walk in through the front door. The thought of her standing in that house, in the house where Derek and Brittany had cataloged and sold every piece of my life, made something hot and protective rise up in my chest. I don't want you in there, I said. If he figures out what you're doing, he won't, she said. She said it with the calm certainty she used when she was telling a patient exactly what was going to happen during a procedure, not to comfort them, but because she had done this before and she knew. I've been in and out of difficult situations my entire career, Uncle Walt. I know how to be unremarkable. She's right, Theo said. Derek doesn't consider Savannah a threat. In his mind, she's a minor figure, a distant relative who brings soup and asks too many questions about medication. He has no reason to be guarded around her. He uncapped his pen again. The camera goes in during her visit. We need it positioned to cover the main living area where Derek and Brittany are most likely to have private conversations. And then we wait, I said. We wait, Theo confirmed. Derek is getting impatient. The insurance policy has a 12-month waiting period, and he knows it. Impatient people make mistakes. Impatient people say things they shouldn't say in places they think are private. He wrote something on the legal pad, then underlined it twice. We also need to obtain the full cloud storage archive from your home security provider. The footage we have covers the asset liquidation, but there may be additional recordings from before the accident. Conversations, behaviors, things. Derek didn't think to hide because he didn't know he was being recorded. How long will all of this take? I asked. Theo considered the question with the unhurried patience of a man who had learned long ago that justice moved at its own speed and couldn't be rushed without breaking. To do it correctly, months, possibly longer. He met my eyes. I know that's hard to hear. It's not hard to hear, I said. I'm 68 years old, and I have been patient my entire life. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, still warm, still solid. I built a freight company one contract at a time. I know how to wait. Savannah looked at me with something in her face that was half pride and half heartbreak. The expression of someone watching a person they love refuse to be destroyed by something that would have destroyed most people. We're going to get him, she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I need you to believe that. I do, I said, and for the first time since that April afternoon in the rain outside my locked gate, I meant it. 3 weeks later, Savannah came back from her visit to Sullivan's Island and called me from the parking garage of her hospital. Her voice was steady. She had trained herself not to let urgency bleed into her tone, the way all good doctors do. But underneath the steadiness, something was pulled tight, like a wire bearing more weight than it was designed for. The camera is in, she said, and Uncle Walt Derek just made the mistake we've been waiting for him to make. Savannah came through the door of Theo's office without knocking, which told me everything I needed to know about the state she was in. She was still in her hospital scrubs, the dark blue ones she wore for long shifts, and her hair had escaped its braid on one side hanging loose against her cheek. She had driven straight from the hospital. She hadn't even stopped to change. She set her laptop on Theo's desk, opened it, and looked at both of us with eyes that were too bright and too wide, the look of someone who has been holding something enormous inside a container that wasn't designed to hold it. I need you to listen to something, she said. All of it. Don't say anything until it's done. Theo sat back in his chair and laced his fingers together. I wheeled closer to the desk. She pressed play. The recording was 23 minutes long. The audio quality was good. The camera she had placed behind the bookshelf in the living room had a directional microphone, and the room had hardwood floors that bounced sound cleanly. For the first 8 minutes, there was nothing significant. The television, the sound of ice in glasses, Brittany asking Derek if he wanted more wine. Then Derek said, "The waiting period ends in 4 months." Brittany's voice came back immediately sharper than I had ever heard it in all the years she had been my daughter-in-law. 4 months is too long. I know it's too long. Derek's voice had none of the warmth, none of the polish he used in public. It was flat and cold, the voice of a man doing arithmetic. But there's nothing I can do about the timeline on the policy. There might be, Brittany said. A pause, the clink of ice. What are you suggesting? Derek asked. I'm suggesting that a man in a wheelchair living alone has accidents. Her voice was so calm, it made my skin crawl, the calm of someone who had already thought this through many times and had stopped feeling anything about it. Stairs, medical equipment. These things happen. He's not living alone, Derek said. He's with Savannah. She works 12-hour shifts, Brittany said. She's not there every minute. My hands gripped the armrests of my wheelchair so hard, the leather creaked. I did not look at Savannah. I could not look at Savannah right then, because I knew if I did, I would come apart, and I needed to hold together what was still coming on the recording. Derek said, "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing," Brittany said, and her voice dropped half a register, smooth and deliberate, as someone reading from a script they had memorized, that we find out where he's staying, and that we make sure the next time he has an accident, it's the kind he doesn't get back up from. The room in Theo's office went so quiet, I could hear the street noise through the closed window 3 floors below. The recording kept playing, Derek asking about traceability, Brittany talking about the blink oxygen monitoring equipment that Walter supposedly used, things that could fail quietly in the night. And then, near the end, near the part that made Savannah's hand fly to her mouth when she first heard it, Derek laughed. A short, satisfied sound. The old man dying, he said, would honestly be the best thing for everyone. He's sitting in a wheelchair. He's useless. At least we'd finally get the insurance money. And Brittany said, just make sure we're not traceable. Savannah pressed stop. The silence that followed was different from ordinary silence. It had weight and texture, like something you could put your hands on. Savannah stood with both palms pressed flat on the desk. Her head down, her shoulders tight, her breath coming in carefully controlled intervals. The way a person breathes when they are keeping themselves from doing something they cannot take back. I looked at the laptop screen, at the waveform display, still showing the recording frozen at the moment Savannah had stopped it. I thought about Derek's voice, not the voice from the recording, but the one from the hospital. Don't worry about anything, Dad. I'll take care of everything. He was going to kill me, I said. The words came out with no particular emotion, which surprised me. I had expected rage. What came instead was something colder and more final, the feeling of a door closing on something that could never be reopened. He was sitting in my living room in my house, and he was planning how to kill me. Savannah lifted her head. Her eyes were red at the rims, not from crying, but from the effort of not crying, that specific, exhausting effort that leaves marks. When I first heard it, she said, her voice cracking on the 4th word, I pulled over on the side of the road. I sat there for 10 minutes. She pressed her knuckles hard against her lips. I couldn't drive. I couldn't make my hands work the wheel. How did you get the file? Theo asked. The camera uploads automatically every 24 hours. She straightened up and pulled herself together with the visible physical effort of a person snapping something back into alignment. I check it from my phone. I saw the timestamp on the new upload at 11 last night, and I listened to it in the parking garage of the hospital before my shift this morning. Her jaw tightened. I did 4 hours of physical therapy with patients after that. 4 hours of smiling and encouraging and saying good. Now try again with that recording sitting in my chest like a piece of glass. Theo picked up his pen. He was not visibly shaken. Theo Hargrove had spent 4 decades in rooms where terrible things were said and documented, and he had learned to process them as information rather than emotion. But his pen moved differently than usual, faster, more deliberate. This recording changes the nature of what we're building, he said. We are no longer dealing exclusively with a civil matter fraud elder, financial abuse, wrongful transfer of assets. This recording introduces criminal conspiracy to commit murder. He looked at me. Walter, I need to be direct with you. We are going to use this, but carefully. Very carefully. What do you mean carefully? I asked. South Carolina's wiretapping statute is complicated. He set the pen down and looked at me steadily. The camera was placed in a home that Derek currently controls. The legality of the recording in a criminal proceeding is something a defense attorney will challenge aggressively, which means we cannot lead with it in a criminal filing. We need to build the civil case first, establish the pattern of conduct, and allow law enforcement to obtain their own warrants based on the probable cause our civil evidence creates. He picked the pen back up. But in a civil proceeding in a courtroom where we are arguing financial fraud and elder abuse, this recording is admissible as evidence of intent. And intent is the column we've been struggling to fill. So we use it at trial, Savannah said. We use it at trial, Theo confirmed. But not until we have everything else in place. The recording is our strongest card. You never play your strongest card first. He made 3 notations on his legal pad, quick and precise. We still need one more piece, something that proves the asset liquidation was premeditated, not reactive, not improvised. He looked up. I have someone in mind. Have who? I asked. Theo almost smiled. The man who bought your house. The man who bought my house on Sullivan's Island was named Grant Ellison. I had never met him. He had purchased the property through a real estate intermediary in late May of 2023, 3 weeks after Derek had put it on the market. Below assessed value, the kind of transaction that happens when the seller doesn't care about price, because what he cares about is speed. Theo had called Grant's office on a Tuesday morning in December. He had not explained the full situation over the phone. Theo never did that. But he had said enough that Grant agreed to a meeting, which told me something about Grant Ellison before I had laid eyes on him. His office was on the 18th floor of a glass building in downtown Charleston, the kind of building that announces itself by reflecting the sky. The view from his conference room took in the full sweep of the harbor, the water moving gray and wide in the December light, cargo ships tracking their slow lines toward the port. I had looked at that same water my whole adult life from the porch of the house this man had bought. The thought sat in my chest like something lodged. Grant Ellison was 55, built like a man who had worked physically before he worked at a desk, with a handshake that was brief and firm and told you exactly as much as he intended. He wore no tie. He waited until Savannah and I were settled before he sat down, and then he looked at Theo and said, "Tell me what's actually going on," Theo told him. Precisely the way Theo told everything: the accident, the forged documents, the insurance policy, the asset liquidation. He did not mention the recording. He did not mention the garage photographs. He laid out only what was necessary for Grant to understand why the house he had purchased was relevant to a legal proceeding. Grant listened without interrupting. His expression didn't shift much, a slight tightening around the eyes, when Theo described the hospital room signature, a jaw that set harder when the asset sales were described. When Theo finished, Grant sat back in his chair and looked at me directly. "How long were you in that house?" he asked. 36 years, I said. He absorbed that. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the reflexive, performed sorry that people offer when they don't know what else to say. The kind that comes from a man who has built things himself and understands what it costs. "What do you need from me?" Theo leaned forward. "When your team did the walkthrough before closing, did they do a full systems assessment of the property?" "Standard practice for a purchase that size," Grant said. "I use the same firm for every acquisition." "During that assessment," Theo said, "was there any mention of a server unit in the electrical panel room?" A security system server approximately the size of a hardback book mounted on the wall. Grant's eyes sharpened. He picked up his phone, scrolled for a moment, and then turned it to show us a photograph, a concrete-walled utility room, pipes and panel boxes along the walls, and mounted to the left of the main breaker box, a small black server unit with a single green indicator light still glowing. My heart lurched in my chest. My tech team flagged it during the walkthrough, Grant said. I told them to leave it in place until I understood what it was connected to. I keep everything until I know what I'm dealing with saves problems later. He set the phone down. Is that what I think it is? It is a cloud-connected security camera server, Theo said. It has been uploading footage continuously since the system was installed in 2020. The cloud storage contract runs through 2025. He paused. The footage on that server covers a period of significant legal relevance, including activity that took place in the house while Mr. Kane was hospitalized. Grant looked at me. And Derek Kane didn't know it was still recording. He did not, Theo said. Grant picked up his pen and turned it once in his fingers, a thinking gesture, the same one Theo had. I'll have my tech team pull the full archive off that server today, he said. What format do you need it in? Savannah exhaled sharp, controlled the breath of someone who had just confirmed something they had feared for a long time, and was now deciding what to do about it. Chain of custody matters, Theo said. I'll need a certified technician to handle the extraction, and I'll need an affidavit from you confirming the server was found in situ during your walkthrough, untouched, unmodified, continuous, from the original installation. Done, Grant said. He did not ask for time to think about it. He did not ask what was in the footage. He simply looked at me and said, "You built that house. Nobody should be able to take that from you." My throat went tight and hot. I pressed my back straight against the wheelchair and kept my face level because I was a 68-year-old man who had survived a spinal fracture and 6 weeks of rehabilitation and being told by his own son that he was a burden, and I was not going to come apart in a conference room on the 18th floor of a building I didn't own. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Don't thank me," Grant said. "Just win." 2 days later, Theo called me at 7 in the evening. Unusual for him, he was a business hours man, and I knew before I answered that the footage had come through. "We have the archive," he said. "All of it. 12 weeks of footage from before the accident through the day you were discharged." He paused for exactly 1 beat. "Walter, there's footage of Derek in your study. He's at your desk. He's photographing documents." "I know," I said. "We saw that in the cloud footage from July." "What we didn't see in July," Theo said, "is what comes 6 minutes before he photographs the documents." Another pause, and this one was longer, more deliberate, the pause of a man choosing the exact right words. "There is footage of Derek on the phone. The call lasts 11 minutes, and from what he says from his side of the conversation, he is discussing the logistics of the asset sales with a dealer, describing specific items, giving valuations." Theo's voice was very steady. "The call is dated March 21st, 2023. I did the calculation before he said it. That's the day before I signed the power of attorney," I said. "Yes," said Theo. "He had already arranged the buyers before you signed anything. The authorization was a formality. He was going to liquidate everything regardless." He let that land. This is no longer a question of whether he planned it, Walter. The only question now is how much he planned and how far back it goes. In the car on the way back to Savannah's apartment that evening, I stared out the window at the Charleston streets going dark under the winter sky. Grant Ellison had said just win. Theo had said the truth was assembling itself piece by piece into something that could not be dismantled. And I thought about something Margaret had told Savannah, that I was the reason she believed people could be good. I hoped she was right. Not for my sake. For the sake of what I was about to do to her nephew, and what it was going to cost all of us before it was over. The morning Theo called me, his voice had a different edge to it, sharper, like a man who had just spotted something in the dark and wasn't sure whether to run toward it or away from it. "Walter, I need you here by 9. Bring Savannah." I didn't ask questions. I just told Savannah, and she was already reaching for her jacket before I finished the sentence. Theo's office on Broad Street smelled the same as always: old mahogany coffee grounds and something faintly like cedar. He stood at the window when we arrived, his back to us, and I noticed his shoulders were tight, bunched up near his ears, the way they got when he was wrestling with something big. "Sit down, both of you," he said, turning around. He dropped a thick manila folder on the table between us. "I hired Raymond Voss, best automotive forensic engineer in the Southeast. 30 years testifies in federal court. I sent him every photograph we have from the garage, the timestamps, the angle shots, the close-ups of the hood latch." My throat went dry. "And," Theo exhaled through his nose, "he says the findings are consistent with what we discussed in July: deliberate interference with the steering system, not accidental damage, not wear." He paused, pressing his knuckles flat against the table. But this time Voss went further. He reviewed the angle and position of Derek's hands across all 6 photographs and submitted a written opinion on the record under his professional signature that the person in that garage understood exactly what they were doing. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't checking something. This was targeted. The air left my lungs. Savannah's hand flew to her mouth, and she let out a sound, a sharp, broken little gasp, like someone had just pressed a thumb into a bruise. "He's saying Derek did it on purpose," she whispered. Her eyes filled instantly, and she blinked hard, fighting it. "He's saying the evidence is consistent with intentional tampering," Theo corrected carefully. "Voss can't confirm it definitively because the vehicle was totaled, but he'll testify that the photographs show someone who knew what they were doing." My hands were shaking so badly that I had to press them flat against my thighs to keep from letting Theo see. 68 years old, and I had never once in my life felt the kind of cold that was moving through me right then. Not in boardrooms, not in the hospital, not even in that rain in my wheelchair with the gate locked in my face. "My own son," I said. My voice came out hoarse, scraped raw. "He stood in that garage the night before I drove out, and he—" "Walter." Theo's voice was firm but gentle. "Don't go there yet. Stay with me." I nodded. I pressed my fingers harder into my thighs and nodded again. Theo leaned forward. "There's something else, and this one comes from Savannah." I turned to her. She was already sitting straighter, her jaw set, her eyes still wet, but her voice steady when she spoke. "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago," she said. "I've known about the trust since 2019. The room tilted. "What?" "Grandpa, Uncle Walter, Margaret told me." Her voice cracked on her grandmother's name, and she pressed the back of her hand against her lips for a moment before continuing. "She called me 2 weeks before she passed. She said you'd set it up years ago, and she wanted me to know in case something ever happened to you. She said, 'Savannah, if Walter ever needs someone in his corner, you be there.' I didn't say anything after you got hurt, because I didn't want you thinking I was there for the money. I needed you to trust me first." I stared at her. My chest felt like it was caving inward, not from betrayal, not even from grief exactly, but from something much larger and much harder to name. The fact that Margaret had known. The fact that she had chosen Savannah. "You came to that hospital," I said slowly, "knowing you might be in that trust, and you never said a word. Because it didn't matter." Her voice broke fully then, and 2 tears spilled down her cheeks fast, one after the other. "You mattered. Getting you safe mattered. The rest of it—" She spread her hands wide helplessly. "I don't care about the money, Walter. I never did." Theo cleared his throat softly. "The reason this matters legally," he said, giving us both a moment to breathe, "is that Savannah's prior knowledge of the trust and her decision not to leverage it not to approach Derek, not to negotiate, actually strengthens her standing as a good faith beneficiary in a South Carolina court. It demonstrates she acted without improper motive. So it helps us, I said. It helps us significantly, Theo confirmed. He closed the folder and folded his hands over it. We now have Voss's engineering analysis. Grant's server footage showing Derek coordinating asset sales 24 hours before your signature, the mini-camera audio, the morphine records, and Savannah's testimony about Margaret's disclosure. He let that list hang in the air for a moment. Walter, I think we're ready to file. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I want one more piece. Patricia Lowe handwriting and document forensics. I'm sending her the insurance policy and the power of attorney. If she can demonstrate that the signature is inconsistent with your baseline, that you were impaired when you signed it, closes the last door Derek has. Savannah wiped her face with the heel of her hand and leaned forward. How long does she need? 2 weeks, Theo said. Maybe 3. Then we wait, I said. We've waited this long. Theo looked at me across the table. This man who had handled my affairs for 22 years, who had drafted every contract, every partnership agreement, every amendment to every deal I'd ever made, and for the first time I saw something in his face that looked like pride. You're the toughest client I've ever had, Walter Kane, he said quietly. I almost laughed. Almost. But my hands were still shaking, and somewhere deep in my chest, Margaret's name was still echoing off the walls. The day Theo filed the complaint, it was raining again. I've started to notice that how rain follows the worst and the best moments of my life alike, as though the sky has no particular opinion about human suffering. Theo called me from the courthouse steps at 11:47 in the morning. It's filed, Walter. Kane versus Kane. Civil elder abuse, fraud, undue influence, and breach of fiduciary duty. The trust enforcement petition is attached. A beat. Derek is going to be served within 48 hours. I sat in Savannah's living room with the phone pressed hard against my ear, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 11 months. Good, I said. Let him feel what it's like to have something come at him he can't stop. The call from Derek came 14 hours later. I answered because Theo had told me to. Document everything he'd said. Don't engage emotionally. Let him talk. Derek's voice was different from what I remembered, tighter, higher, like a wire pulled a half-turn past its tolerance. Dad. He said it like a weapon and a plea at the same time. Dad, whatever Theo Hargrove has told you, you need to understand that man has his own agenda. He's been your attorney for decades. He's positioned himself to Huptum. Derek, I said quietly, the benefit from any restructuring of your estate, and if you would just listen to me for 5 minutes. Derek. My voice came out harder the second time, and it surprised even me. He stopped. I listened to you for 41 years, I said. I'm done. I ended the call. My hand was shaking so badly that the phone nearly slipped off my knee, and I gripped it with both hands and held on. Savannah came out of the kitchen with 2 mugs and saw my face. She set the mugs down immediately and crossed the room. What did he say? Nothing that matters anymore. But my voice cracked on the last word, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and I had to press my lips together hard to keep from coming apart right there. Derek's attorney was a man named Clifford Byrne, $300 an hour, sharp suits, and a specialty in delay. Theo had warned me about him. Byrne's strategy will be time, Theo had said back in March. He'll file motions, challenge jurisdiction, challenge the trust's validity, challenge Voss's credentials, challenge Patricia Lowe's methodology. Every motion costs us a hearing date. He wants to exhaust you financially and emotionally. He was right. By April, Byrne had filed 4 preliminary motions. By May, the court had scheduled and rescheduled our initial hearing twice. By June, I had spent more hours in Theo's office than I had in my own bedroom, reviewing depositions, signing declarations, answering interrogatories that felt designed specifically to humiliate me. One afternoon in late June, Theo dropped a 40-page document on his desk in front of me and said, "Byrne is requesting an independent psychological evaluation. He's arguing that your capacity to pursue litigation is compromised by the accident." Savannah shot to her feet so fast, her chair scraped back against the hardwood. "That is outrageous," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "He's trying to say Walter can't think for himself. He's been managing his own affairs since—" "Savannah." Theo held up a hand. "I know, but we should let them have it." She stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Theo leaned back and the ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Because Walter is going to walk into that evaluation and perform exactly as he always has. Sharp, composed, articulate. And when Dr. Grayson files her report and confirms full cognitive competency, Byrne loses his last procedural shield." I looked at Theo. "Who is Dr. Grayson?" "Dr. Helen Grayson, neuropsychologist, MUSC affiliate. She's conducted capacity evaluations in 3 elder abuse cases I've handled. She's thorough and she's fair." He met my eyes steadily. "Are you willing?" "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice, Walter." I thought about the $15 million policy with Derek's name on it. I thought about the photographs of his hands at my car's hood. I thought about the rain on my face outside that locked gate, and Savannah's voice saying, "I've got you." "Schedule it," I said. Dr. Grayson's office was on the 4th floor of a building near the medical district. Clean lines, pale walls, a window that looked out over a line of old magnolias. She was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a voice that was professionally warm without being condescending. "Mr. Kane," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I want you to understand this is not adversarial. My job is simply to document your cognitive function. Verbal reasoning, memory judgment, executive function, standard battery." "I understand," I said. "Are you nervous?" I laughed a short, dry sound. "Dr. Grayson, I built a trucking company from 2 leased trucks and a storage unit. I've been in bankruptcy court and merger negotiations in a hospital bed wondering if I'd ever move my legs again. This," I gestured at the room around us, "I can handle." She smiled genuinely, not professionally, and picked up her pen. "Good, let's begin." 3 hours later, she walked me to the elevator and said, "I'll have my report to the court in 2 weeks, Mr. Kane." I thanked her and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed and I leaned back against the wall of the elevator, closed my eyes, and let out a long, unsteady breath. 2 more weeks. And then finally the courtroom. I had been inside Charleston County Courthouse before twice for business disputes that never made it past mediation. Back then, I walked in on my own 2 feet, briefcase in hand, with the confidence of a man who had built something worth protecting. This time, Savannah pushed my wheelchair through the side entrance, and every inch of that corridor felt like swallowing glass. "How are you feeling?" she asked, leaning close as we passed security. "Like a man about to watch his son lie about him in public," I said. Her jaw tightened visibly. "Then let's make sure the truth is louder." Courtroom 4 was smaller than I'd imagined. Pale walls, fluorescent lighting. Wood paneling nobody had touched since probably 1987. 30 people in the gallery. Theo's paralegal with her rolling cart of binders. And in the second row, Brittany Kane, cream blazer hair arm pulled back. Face arranged into controlled sympathy that turned my stomach completely over. Derek was already seated. A charcoal suit I didn't recognize, bought recently, which meant he had prepared for this the way a man prepares for a performance. He turned when he heard my wheels, and for one fraction of a second, something crossed his face that might have been shame. Then Byrne leaned over and said something, and whatever it was disappeared entirely. Theo gripped my shoulder briefly. "You ready?" "I've been ready since April 2023, I said. He almost smiled. Judge Harold Hartwell entered at 9 o'clock, exactly, tall, silver-haired, unhurried. A man who had seen every variety of human desperation pass through his courtroom and learned to let none of it rush him. "We are here in the matter of Cain versus Cain," he said. "Civil elder abuse fraud, undue influence breach of fiduciary duty, and petition for enforcement of the Cain family, revocable living trust of 2008. Are both parties prepared?" "Plaintiff is ready, Your Honor," Theo said. Byrne rose smoothly, younger than Theo, polished, dark-eyed, carrying the easy confidence of a man who charged by the hour and enjoyed every minute of it. "Defense is ready. We'd like to raise a preliminary challenge regarding the plaintiff's capacity to direct and sustain litigation." Judge Hartwell looked at him over his glasses. "That matter was addressed in Dr. Grayson's July evaluation. Her report is in evidence. We believe a real-time courtroom assessment would better serve the court's understanding of Mr. Byrne." The judge's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "Dr. Grayson is a board-certified neuropsychologist with 30 years of court-appointed experience. Her report confirms full cognitive competency. I will not relitigate that question on my courtroom floor. Move forward." "Of course, Your Honor," I exhaled. Under the table, Savannah's hand found my forearm and held on. Byrne's opening ran 22 minutes. He was good. He described Derek as a devoted son making difficult decisions under crisis, acting in what he believed were his father's best interests. He used the word love 4 times, grief 3 times, as though Derek had suffered the greater loss. Every single word landed on my skin like a lit match. When Theo rose, he walked to the center of the room and spoke quietly, conversationally, the way he always spoke across his own desk. "My client, Walter Cain, built a trucking empire from 2 leased vehicles and a storage unit in North Charleston. 40 years of work built to leave a legacy reflecting his values." He paused. "What the evidence will show is that while Mr. Cain lay in a hospital bed unable to move his legs, his son moved with extraordinary speed to strip that legacy to the bone. And this was not impulsive. It was planned." The room went absolutely still. Under the table, my hands were shaking so hard I laced my fingers together just to hold them still. The first witness was Dr. Helen Grayson, called to address Byrne's capacity challenge directly before it gained any traction. She took the stand with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. "Dr. Grayson," Theo said, "does Walter Cain possess the cognitive capacity to understand these proceedings and direct his counsel?" "Yes, unambiguously. Mr. Cain scores in the 92nd percentile for his age group across all measured domains. His executive reasoning is exceptional." Byrne rose on cross. "Isn't it true that cognitive capacity can fluctuate, that a patient may test well in a controlled setting, yet show impaired judgment under emotional stress?" Dr. Grayson looked at him steadily. "That is true of all human beings, Mr. Byrne, including attorneys." A ripple moved through the gallery. The gavel tapped once. Byrne's jaw tightened. No further questions. Court recessed shortly after. In the corridor, Savannah leaned close. "You're doing beautifully. Just keep breathing." "Byrne is saving something," I said. "He'll come harder tomorrow." "So will we," she answered. And underneath the exhaustion in her voice, I heard something that did not bend, something solid enough to hold the weight of everything still ahead. I held on to that for the rest of the day. The second morning of trial, I woke at 4:30 and couldn't go back to sleep. Savannah found me in her kitchen at 5, both hands wrapped around a mug that had gone completely cold, staring at the dark city beyond the window. "You didn't sleep," she said. Not a question. "I kept thinking about Derek's face yesterday," I admitted. "When Grayson said 92nd percentile. Did you see him?" Savannah poured her coffee and sat across from me. I saw Byrne's face. He looked like a man who'd just realized his parachute had a hole in it. I laughed, a real one, rough and short. It loosened something in my chest that had been knotted there since the morning before. "Are you ready to hear it all said out loud?" she asked. "In that room in front of everyone." I thought about it honestly. "No," I said, "but I'm going to do it anyway." She put her hand over mine. "That's always been enough for you, Walter. It'll be enough today." Grant Ellison took the stand at 9:14. Broad-shouldered, measured, the kind of man who chose his words the way a carpenter chose his tools. Theo walked him through his purchase of the Sullivan's Island property, the server unit discovered in the utility room, and the chain of custody he had maintained over the footage archive. When you realized the server contained recordings from the previous owner's surveillance system, Theo said, "What did you do?" "I called my attorney. He told me to document everything, make no alterations, and contact the original owner's legal representative." Grant paused. "I wanted to do the right thing. That house was Walter Kane's. Whatever was on that server belonged to him." I pressed my fist against my mouth. Hearing a stranger say that simply without drama hit me somewhere deep and completely unguarded. Theo moved to the exhibits. The courtroom monitor displayed a still-frame timestamp, March 21st, 2023, 3:47 p.m. The day before, I signed the power of attorney. The footage played. Grainy, but clear. Derek stood in my study phone to his ear. The audio was partial, but 3 phrases came through unmistakably. "Move the navigator piece." The signatures handled. "The old man won't know until it's too late." The gallery stirred. Brittany gripped the bench in front of her so hard her knuckles whitened. Byrne objected immediately. Theo answered with a manufacturer's affidavit, third-party timestamp verification, and Grant's sworn testimony. Judge Hartwell overruled without hesitation. Byrne sat back down slowly. I watched his jaw tighten, his nostrils flare, and I knew he had not expected that footage to come in clean. Douglas Farr, the forensic accountant, followed Grant. Thin, wire-framed glasses unhurried. He had reviewed 23 asset transactions executed while Derek held power of attorney. Aggregate appraised value approximately $4.1 million, he said. Total proceeds recovered $1.74 million. Assets sold at between 38 and 52 cents on the dollar. "Do these prices reflect market rate sales?" Theo asked. "No. This pattern is consistent with deliberate asset liquidation, designed to reduce the estate's recoverable value." Byrne pushed back hard on Cross, suggesting a grieving son, managing under pressure, might produce below-market results. Douglas looked at him the way a professor looks at a student who has confidently written the wrong answer. "A distressed sale might account for 15% below market, Mr. Byrne. Not 48% across 23 transactions over 3 months. Byrne moved on quickly. Dr. Patricia Lowe took the stand. Last, silver-haired, precise, carrying a thick, color-coded folder, like a woman who had done this 200 times and expected to do it 200 more. Her findings were devastating in their simplicity. The signatures on both the power of attorney and the insurance application showed inconsistent pen pressure, shortened letter formations, and terminal strokes characteristic of severely impaired motor control. "Were these signatures produced under full voluntary informed consent?" Theo asked. "No," she said, looking directly at the judge. "The probability of significant pharmacological impairment at the time of signing is extremely high." The room stopped breathing. When she stepped down, Theo addressed the judge. "The plaintiff has one final piece of evidence. We request it be heard tomorrow morning." "What is the nature of this evidence?" "Audio recording, Your Honor. 23 minutes. I believe the court will find it significant." Judge Hartwell held his gaze, then nodded. "Court resumes at 9 tomorrow. We are adjourned." The gavel fell. Across the room, Derek grabbed Byrne's arm so hard the attorney visibly flinched. "Tomorrow," I thought. "Everything comes out tomorrow." I did not eat breakfast that morning. Savannah made eggs and toast and set the plate in front of me at 6:30. I sat there looking at it until everything went cold, and she took it away without a word of complaint. "You need to eat something," she said, refilling my coffee instead. "I can't. My stomach feels like I swallowed a fistful of gravel." She sat down across from me. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept any better than I had. Her voice was careful, measured, like she'd been rehearsing it since before dawn. "Whatever happens today, you already won, Walter. You stood up. You didn't disappear. You didn't let them bury you." Something old and broken shifted in my chest, just barely beginning to move. "Let's go win for real," I said. Theo was waiting at the plaintiff's table when we arrived, folder open, reading glasses on yellow legal pad covered in careful handwriting. He looked up when I rolled in and said 3 words. "Today ends it." I believed him. Judge Hartwell entered at 9 o'clock exactly. The gallery was fuller than it had been, and the air carried that particular electric charge of a room where people understood something important was about to happen. "Mr. Hargrove," the judge said, "the court is ready for your final evidence." Theo rose. The plaintiff moves to admit Plaintiff's Exhibit 22, an audio recording captured November 14th, 2023, within the Sullivan's Island property on a server the plaintiff retained ownership of through chain of title documentation. The recording runs 23 minutes. I will play approximately 6 minutes of relevant material. Byrne was on his feet immediately. "Objection, one-party consent, privacy violation. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, Mr. Byrne," Theo said without raising his voice. "The plaintiff as original server owner constitutes that consenting party under Section 1730-20 of the South Carolina Code." Judge Hartwell studied the documentation for a full minute. The courtroom held its breath. "Objection overruled. Proceed." Byrne sat down so hard his chair scraped the floor. Theo nodded to his paralegal. She pressed play. Derek's voice filled the room, and something happened to me that I was not prepared for. Not rage, not grief. Something colder. A recognition so total my whole body understood before my mind caught up. "The waiting period ends in 4 months, Britt. 4 months and the policy pays out clean." Brittany's voice followed lower, faster, precise. "And if he recovers, if he gets mobile and starts talking to people, he's not going to recover. He's 68 in a wheelchair. He's not going to—" "Derek," a pause. "I'm not talking about his legs." A sound moved through the gallery, not a gasp, more like 30 people inhaling at the exact same moment. Brittany's voice continued. "We need the old man moved into a facility, somewhere that limits who he can see. He won't go voluntarily. Then we make it so he has no choice." Another beat. 4 full seconds, then very quiet, very clear. "Or we handle it the way we should have handled it on Highway 17. Properly this time." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hartwell's gavel came down 3 times hard. "Order! I will have order!" I gripped my armrests until my knuckles ached. My vision blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from the sensation of the last solid thing I'd been holding onto giving way all at once. They had planned it. Not just the assets, not just the policy. They had planned me, my removal, my erasure completely. Savannah had her hand pressed flat over her mouth, shoulders shaking, crying the way a person cries when they have held it together for 18 months, and have finally at this exact moment run completely out of road. Theo waited for the room to settle. Then, in a voice of absolute deliberate calm, "Your Honor, the plaintiff rests." Byrne rose, his face the color of old chalk. "The defense requests a recess. Court will resume at 1 o'clock. Judge Hartwell said, his gaze steady and final. "I will have my ruling ready." In the shuffling and murmuring of everyone rising, I reached over and took Savannah's hand. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling hard against mine. 1 more hour, I thought. Hold on, 1 more hour. The lunch recess lasted 3 hours, not 1. We sat in a small conference room down the hall, Theo, Savannah, and me, with coffee. None of us drank, and sandwiches none of us touched. Theo reviewed his notes. Savannah leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes, exhausted, clear through to her bones. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and watched the clock move with the particular cruelty of clocks in rooms where you are waiting for something that will change your life. At 12:10, Theo looked up and said, "How are you holding up? I'm 68 years old in a wheelchair, and I just heard my son's wife talk about finishing what they started on Highway 17. I said, "How do you think I'm holding up?" He studied me for a moment. "You're holding up fine," he said quietly. At 1:47, his phone buzzed. He read it, set it face down, and looked at me. "The judge is ready." Courtroom 4 was absolutely still when Judge Hartwell entered for the final time. He sat down, arranged his papers, removed his glasses, and cleaned them with the deliberateness of a man who understood that the next 5 minutes would matter for a very long time. In the matter of Cain versus Cain, he began, the court finds as follows. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The power of attorney dated March 22nd, 2023 invalid. The signatory was demonstrably under pharmacological impairment at signing. All asset transactions executed under this instrument are hereby voided. Beside me, Savannah pressed her fist against her sternum like she was trying to hold herself together from the inside. The coastal life insurance policy application similarly invalid, declared void and unenforceable. At the defense table, Derek sat with his face in his hands. Regarding the Cain Family Revocable Living Trust of 2008. Derek Allen Cain has engaged in conduct explicitly prohibited under Clause 11. Financial exploitation, fraudulent instruments, documented conspiracy to cause physical harm to the grantor. The judge paused, and the entire room seemed to contract around me. Derek Allen Cain is hereby disqualified as beneficiary in its entirety. The trust shall be enforced as written with Savannah Marie Merrill as designated successor beneficiary. Savannah broke. Not dramatically, the quiet collapse of someone who had been strong for too long. She bent forward, both hands covering her face, sobbing in deep, wrenching waves that shook her whole body. I put my hand on her back and felt her trembling, and I pressed my own lips together so hard they went numb. Judge Hartwell's voice hardened. This matter is referred to the Charleston County District Attorney for Criminal Investigation, Elder Financial Abuse Insurance Fraud, and Conspiracy regarding the incident of March 14, 2023. Derek lifted his face. 41 years I had known him, and I had never seen what was on it now. Not guilt, not remorse, pure animal fear. He looked straight at me across that courtroom and said loudly enough that every person in the room heard it, "Dad, please." My chest cracked open. I will not pretend it didn't. Theo rested his hand briefly on my shoulder. No words. Just that one quiet touch from a man who had fought beside me and knew nothing adequate remained to say. Savannah lifted her head, eyes, swollen cheeks, streaked hair coming loose. She whispered, "What do we do now?" I looked at her. This young woman who had shown up with soup and no agenda and had given me back piece by piece the will to keep going. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the oak tree, the salt air, the lights in every window of a house that had once been full of everything I loved. "We go home," I said. Her face crumpled, but this time through the tears she was smiling. The most honest thing I had seen in 2 years. I reached up and squeezed her hand. And for the first time since March 14, 2023, I felt it. The ground solid under me again. They asked me once what I would have done differently. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I would have paid less attention to what I was building, I said, and more attention to who I was building it with. I spent 40 years constructing something I thought would outlast me. I forgot that legacy isn't stone and timber and a Sullivan's Island address. Legacy is the person who shows up with soup when you can't move your legs. Legacy is the young woman who knew about a trust for 5 years and never once used it as leverage because she came for me, not for what I owned. I am not a religious man by nature. But sitting in that courtroom on September 12th, when the gavel came down and Savannah reached for my hand, I understood perhaps for the first time what people mean when they say God's timing is never early and never late. So here is what I will tell you plainly as one flawed human being to another. Don't be like I was. Don't wait until you are in a hospital bed to learn who truly loves you. Don't let silence and pride build walls that greed walks right through. Look at your family, really look before the storm arrives, and you discover too late who was standing beside you and who was already measuring the furniture. These are what people call grandpa stories, old, worn, smooth, told from wheelchairs and kitchen tables. But the best grandpa stories carry the weight of real cost, real loss, real love. This is one of those. This is a family story about what blood can do to itself when money enters the room, and what love can do when it decides to stay anyway. Every grandpa story I know ends the same way the best family stories always do not. With wealth, not with verdicts, but with someone saying, "We go home," and meaning it with everything they have left. That is the only family story worth telling. If any part of Walter's journey moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below telling me who in your life would show up with soup. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe, because the next chapter is already waiting for you. Thank you truly for staying with Walter until the very end. It means more than you know. A gentle note. Before we meet again. Some of the stories ahead contain fictional elements constructed purely for the purpose of reflection and meaningful conversation. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you best. But if you're staying, I'm glad. See you in the next one.